we are starting with our second session, that is on then and now evolution from past to present. The chairpersons for this session are respected Dr. Atul Munshi sir, Dr. Pushpa Sethi ma'am, and Dr. Jignesh Shah sir. Dr. Atul Munshi sir is a consulting obs-gynae specialist, director of Munshi Group of Hospitals. Sir has been IMS representative to APMF.
Good morning, everyone, and congratulations to the.
One sentence, we all are past presidents.
Okay. Okay.
I think this session will be very informative and interesting, the one which is coming up. There are three giants in the field, they are going to talk about it. Dr. Jyoti will talk about past, and present. Dr. Meeta, who is a guideline specialist, she is going to talk about when and how to give it. And last but not least, Dr. Shashi, the latest apparatus which she has made. So let's have our first speaker, Dr. Jyoti Unni. Journey of MHT.
Good morning, everyone. This is going to be slightly different from all the talks that you have heard so far, and I will omit the last few slides of the current situation because they've already been spoken and will be spoken in the future also. Okay. So it all started in the late 19th century where people established the clear relationship between a woman's ovaries and her symptoms. So there were crude treatments such as the injection of ground animal ovarian extracts which were used, and there was a scientific breakthrough in the 1920s with the isolation of steroid hormones. And at this time, what was used was estrone. In the 1930s, Premarin was established from the urine of pregnant mares, and this was a natural source of a mixture of estrogen. And as you all know, Premarin is still available as a conjugated equine estrogen. So this was standardized and it was orally available, and it was used for the treatment of vasomotor symptoms, which was the most disabling symptom of menopause. So this molecule has really been available from way back in the 1930s. In the 1940s and 50s, after the World War II, there was a lot of societal focus on women's health because many of the men had gone to war and had either never returned or had come back with a lot of disabilities, morbidities, loss of limbs, etc. So they realized that women could also look after all the jobs which were traditionally men's jobs. And by then, longevity had also increased. And because of that, the postmenopausal period of women had increased. So there was a big focus on alleviating their symptoms, because if they had to join the workforce, they had to be fit and well to do that. In 1966, there was a publication of a bestseller by Robert Wilson, which he titled Feminine Forever. And in that, he advocated estrogen as the panacea of all ills. He said menopause is a hormone deficiency disease which is curable and totally preventable. Just take estrogen. So pharma companies capitalized on this, aggressively marketed estrogen, and millions of women started taking unopposed estrogen. In the 70s, some clinicians realized that there seems to be a possibility of endometrial cancer with all this unopposed estrogen. So estrogen started getting a bad reputation until researchers discovered that reducing the dose of estrogen and adding progesterone could reduce the risk. And this is when combined therapy came in for women with an intact uterus. And there was renewed enthusiasm in hormone replacement therapy. Early in 1980, FDA approval was given, but initially this was originally only for vasomotor symptoms. By 1988, they realized that there's quite an impact on bone health, and so FDA approved it for prevention of osteoporosis, but said that they needed some studies for the prevention of chronic diseases. Because at that time, it was being taken that, okay, women can take it for everything, and the healthy forever concept came in. So in the 1990s, the American College of Physicians guideline said that HRT should be given for prevention of chronic diseases, and there were claims of benefits in cardiovascular disease. But the FDA required randomized controlled trials because until then, there were only observational studies. So in 1998, the HERS study came out, and this was one of the initial studies looking at cardiovascular health. And HERS was the heart and estrogen progesterone replacement therapy, where there were almost 2,700 postmenopausal women who already had coronary artery disease. Here, again, the mean age was 67 years. It was multicentric, and they used the estrogen for 36 months. And they found that in the first year after initiation, there was an increase in the recurrence of the cardiovascular risk. And so it was said that it was definitely not to be used for secondary prevention. And then the HERS2 data came out, which showed that later there seemed to be a reduction in cardiovascular risk, though in the first year it increased. And we've heard a lot about the WHI. Now this, as we know, was of lots of women, and the problem here was that it was conjugated equine estrogens with MPA, so the progesterone was already an androgenic progesterone, and it was the wrong population because they already had diseases and they were older than the women in whom we usually prescribe hormone therapy. So there were two peaks, essentially, of the HRT, initially in the 60s and later in 1999 and 2000. But after the WHI results came out in 2002, which came out in a very wrong way in the lay press before clinicians could actually look at it and talk about it and put it to the public and women who were taking HRT in a more scientific way, people were absolutely scared, both women who were taking the HRT as well as clinicians who were prescribing it. And there was a dramatic fall world over. But what they saw in the subsequent 10 years was that there was no reduction in breast cancer rates. So this whole scare about breast cancer, which is why this was stopped, was actually looked as if it may be unfounded for most women. There may be some increase in risk, but in a certain group. And so after that, what has changed? The low-dose therapy came in, the timing hypothesis, which we heard about, less androgenic progestrogens. So from MPA and norethistron acetate, we moved to dydrogesterone and micronized progesterone. And there were lots of studies which came out, like the E3N French cohort, which showed that with these progesterones, which were not increasing the androgenic, which were not increasing the lipid profiles and things, there was not such a problem with cardiovascular risk and DVT risk, and also there was not as much of a breast cancer risk. Because WHI data and Million Women study data clearly showed us that it was not really the estrogen, but the progesterone and the number of days of progesterone which seemed to increase the breast cancer risk. Then came the route of delivery of estrogens and progestrogens. So, as Dr. Munshi has brought out, the LNG IUS system being used in women with an intact uterus was very good, because then it protected the endometrium, because women, if they are taking estrogen and progesterone separately as tablets, clearly recognize that it is during the progesterogenic phase that they get a lot of the adverse effects. like breast discomfort and things like that. So they just stop taking the progesterone. You think you're prescribing them combined therapy, but they are actually taking unopposed estrogen. So if women agree to have the LNG IUS system, it completely takes care of their endometrium, and you don't have to worry that they are stopping the progesterogenic component. And the estrogens also, which initially when they came as patches, we weren't able to use them in India because of the tropical climate. They kept falling off, and so they went out of the market. But since 4 or 5 years, we are getting a transdermal spray and a transdermal gel, so those can be used quite safely, and I'm sure in the subsequent talks, you'll hear a little more about them. The new kid on the block is the TSEC, or the tissue selective estrogen complex, which is a combination of bazidoxifin, which is a SERM, with conjugated equine estrogen. And this seems to be having many of the effects which we require on vasomotor symptoms without causing the problems that other things have started. So the lower doses were used because it was found with studies that there was continued efficacy with fewer side effects. So there's a potential for greater acceptance by women. So they were continuing their therapy for longer, and the efficacy in the prevention of osteoporosis was not compromised. So this data mainly came initially from the HOPE trial. After that, the Replenish trial also came, where they used different doses and placebo, lower and lower doses of both conjugated equine estrogen and progesterone, and they found that they were favorable effects. Then we talked about the window of opportunity, which we've already heard about. So if we use it in the early menopausal years, when the endothelium is still healthy and elastic and able to dilate with the use of estrogen before the atheroma actually develops, then perhaps it will be good for primary prevention, but still not for secondary prevention of cardiac disease. So you have heard about the KEEP study and the ELITE study, so I won't go into this, but these are the two major trials which dealt with the timing hypothesis and came up that early there is no progression. So the three most beneficial effects of estrogens are what we've heard about: genitourinary symptoms, vasomotor symptoms, and other benefits like sleep, decrease in colon cancer risk, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and there's a possibility of good effect in CVD and cognition. POI, as we've heard, should be regular doses, not low dose. So the drug and route depends on several factors, which we'll hear about now. So this joint statement was given by various international bodies that it should be individualized and there should be no arbitrary limits on dose or duration. Now the IMS guidelines have been there right from the beginning. The Indian Menopause Society in 1998, 2002, and 2008 were the first three guidelines which Dr. Urvashi Jha, the founder secretary general, later to become the president, had initiated. 2008, Dr. Sonia Malik was president, but the guidelines were formulated by Dr. Urvashi. And 2013 and 2020 were the guidelines which Dr. Meeta and her team had looked at. And now, as we all know, the 2026 guidelines have come up. And in this, we see that the women eligible for MHT are those with menopausal symptoms, where this is the most effective treatment. For bone health, it's the first line if there are no contraindications. For premature ovarian insufficiency and early menopause, it should be given till the natural age of menopause, before 60 years and less than 10 years since menopause. And vaginal estrogen is most effective for GSM across all ages. So there have been controversies through several decades. MHT started as treatment for vasomotor symptoms, and that indication is still valid. The problems was adverse effects and looking at what it does on long-term consequences. Lower doses and different formulations have evolved. It is ever evolving, so we need to keep updated, and we should not deny MHT to those who need it. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Jyoti. And MHT, besides knowing all the pros and cons and all the guidelines, it is always nice to know the history of MHT, because normally we have followed the history after post WHI. Before that, normally I don't think we have really gone into the history. And today it was really, really, so many points that we will carry home as far as the history of MHT is concerned. And thank you so much for a very concise and very informative talk.